So what we're going to do now is we're going to start off with a plain stitch. So I've got some fabric rectangles that are about 20 centimetres by 10 centimetres. This is just calico, so just a cotton material. So what we're going to start off with is pinning the material together. So let me just, the camera will refocus. There we go. So we're working on the edges together, so your raw edges need to go together. And when we're working with fabric, we're going to be using the right sides together. So it's the right sides is the side that you see when you look at the fabric. That's the side that is going to be the outer piece. The inside is going to be the piece that you don't see. So the wrong side is the side against your skin. So if you'll notice, I have pinned in two different ways because I want to show you that you can pin either way. You can actually stitch over your pins, or you can have them this way and you can pull them out as you sew them. Now I find that having the pins this way and stitching over them is secure. Now you can have your pins this way and you don't have to sew over them, you can pull them out, or you can line them up this way, but because you have to pull them out before you've stitched over them, sometimes it's not as secure when you're going round curves. So I'll show you on the sewing machine anyway. So I've marked where my seam allowance is, because on my sewing machine there isn't a seam allowance marker. So all I've done is I've got my tape measure and a pencil, and I've just measured from the needle. So I'll just show you. So from the needle, where the needle goes in, I'm going to put my marker there, look. So my needle goes in, that's where my needle goes in, and then my 1.5 marker is just there. So I'm just going to put a mark with pencil, and that's on the 1.5 centimetres. So if you inches, you're 5/8 of an inch, so you'll pop it under, and then it will be 5/8 of an inch, which is just there, look. So it's the same, 1.5, 5/8 of an inch. So why we need the seam allowance marker is that so we don't have to mark seam allowance on our fabric. So you're going to put your material under the foot. Now you want the material to be well under, so this is where your material goes in, and there's your feet underneath at the back. I don't think you can see them. So the edge of your material wants to start off covering the feet, not too far in and not too far forward, else you're going to get your cotton will start knotting. So you want your material to cover the feet under the machine, so that's the dog feed, it's called. Feed dog. Feed them. So I'm going to put my material in to where the feet are, and then I've got my seam allowance marker at the side. So I'm going to run this raw edge all the way, all the time. I'm going to keep it lined up with this seam allowance marker. So now I've done that, I'm going to put my foot down, and then I'm going to put my needle in. So by putting the needle in, it stops your thread from popping out. And then I'm going to start sewing. So I'm going to go forward for a couple, and then I'm going to do a back stitch. So forward for a couple, and then I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to go forward again. So a back stitch reinforces your stitch, so it keeps it nice and secure, it doesn't come undone. So I'm going to stitch all the way down, and can you see I'm stitching over those pins, or when it gets close to, I can pull that out. Carry on sewing, remembering to keep your seam allowance, so your edge of your raw edge on that seam allowance marker that we did, and then keep going, And then when you get to the pin, to the point where the pin is just touching the foot, that's the time where you need to then take it out and carry on. So sometimes it's a good idea to stop and just check everything's alright, you're lined up okay, and then you can carry on. And then at the end, I'm going to do a back stitch again, so I'm going to get close to the edge, and then I'm going to press my back stitch, and then come forward again. And then that should be a plain seam. So I'll take my pins out, and I'm just going to cut my raw edges off, not raw edges, my thread. And now, to get a really lovely finish, what we're going to do is we're going to press the seam allowance open. Now it's a really important stage, pressing, and you should stitch and then press and then finish your seam. So I'm going to press my seam allowance open. So I'm just opening the seam with my finger, and I'm just going to run it down, because what we want to happen is where the stitch line is, we want the folds of the material to go together. So we want the folds of the material to sit flat like that, because at the minute they're not. So a nice finger press, and then we're going to use the iron, and we're just going to run the iron straight up, keeping it nice and open. So if you've got a steam irons work really well. So that's the seam flat there. So I'm just going to flip it around so you can see the right side. And can you see how that's smooth? So I'm just going to give it a little press on the front as well. So that's your plain seam. So that's a little refresher for your plain seam. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a